Rolling through another Friday afternoon here on 105.7 WHWS here, as we've got on the line with us, we've got co-host of the Inside the D3 Football Huddle podcast, James Baker, also Hobart class of 1996. Can you hear us? You there?
Having me on, it feels like a big honor. Inaugural guest with the Broadstreet Boys.
Yeah, we're glad to have you on. It was nice that the two podcasts, I've seen your stuff all over, being, especially during football season, being retweeted by HWS Athletics, and even talking Bucks football too. So I've seen it all over. So I'm glad that we were able to connect, especially on homecoming weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we were talking about the matchup between the Statesmen and the Giants from Keystone College, which would have been the game tomorrow if things kind of worked out the way we had hoped. But unfortunately, some of the higher-ups at the NCAA and Division I put in some things that just really made the Division III season, not just football, but all sports across the board, pretty much impossible because of different requirements and legal liability-related matters. It's a bummer. My heart breaks for the senior class. Hopefully there will be some kind of spring season, although I'm not very confident about it, to be perfectly honest, given what the Big Ten and others are starting to put into motion. But, hey, hopefully you guys are having a great homecoming weekend, even if it's kind of sports free. You got the NFL, you got other big college games like the SEC starting this weekend, and we'll just have to roll with that.
Yeah, definitely. And coming from somebody who broadcasts a lot of the HWS athletics games here on WHWS, it's like, what do I do with my weekends? What do I do with my Saturdays now?
Seriously, yeah. I mean, you might have to start another podcast like Ted Baker. I mean, he was talking to Coach Raymond earlier this week, and there's still stuff to be bandied about there. But yeah, it's slim pickings as far as any statesman sports, at least for the short term.
Exactly, and you mentioned HWS Homecoming. You teased it on Twitter a little bit. One of the big events at HWS Homecoming is the Fall Nationals, which is a soapbox derby down the backside of William Smith Hill, down by the barn. You teased a story that you had, if you wanted to share that one.
Yeah, well, this is actually the 10th anniversary of what was pretty much the last time you were really allowed to have very fast derby cars. So I was a member of the Hobart Alumni Association's executive board, and Jared Whedon had recruited me to be the pilot, or maybe the crash test dummy, for the HAA's derby car, which, to describe it, is, it was kind of like a modified adult tricycle. So it had two large wheels in the back with a single wheel in the front with kind of a standard bike, handlebar situation. And underneath sort of or on top of the chassis was basically like a large easy chair, sort of like a single person sofa, if that makes any sense. There were no pedals. You were basically, the only way you could brake this thing or slow down was to use the, kind of your heel of your sneaker or shoe or boot, whatever you're wearing. And then there was a kind of a makeshift broomstick handle that was screwed in to the chassis that you pulled up to slow the quote-unquote car down. But keep in mind, the surface area of that brake was about the size of a quarter. And so even though Jared said that this thing would be, flying down the road there, and about halfway down, I realized, even though I'm trying to slow myself down with my heels and this brake thing, I just keep getting faster and faster and faster. I mean, I'm killing whoever I was racing against. They weren't even close. And in one split second, I kind of looked down real quick to see, is there a way I can, make the brake work a little better? And I must have jerked the left handlebar thing a little bit. So basically, this whole couch contraption jackknifed and launched me Superman style straight through the air. I landed, flat on my chest, and thank God that Bob Toner had given me a Hobart Statesman football helmet to wear, because my head definitely met the pavement. The helmet didn't have a strap on it, which was stupid on my part, but it took the majority of the hit. The helmet flew off, rolled off into the crowd, and then I kind of came to a screeching halt. I was had some contusions on my chest. Definitely had some scrapes, bumps, and bruises. And apparently, after there was this huge reaction from the crowd, like this, "Oh my God, whoa!" type of reaction. President Guerin turned around and said to Jared, that thing's never allowed to race in this thing ever again. So, I mean, the EMTs came and checked me out. I apparently, passed the concussion test and all that stuff. And I was going to no matter what, because my buddies and I were there to play. We were in a rock band back when we were in college, and we were about to perform before the football game. And I was like, yeah, I got to go down and play this game. So even though I was really banged up, and apparently from that day on, you could only have really small and really slow derby cars. It was definitely one of those stories that you never forget.
Well, you end up with the battle scars there, and that's like you have a story to tell. A decade later. So Chris also mentioned that you wanted to talk about some Bucs football, and
I've
been
a season ticket holder since Allie was drafted, and we've known the Marpet family since he was probably a sophomore at Hobart. So we go back a ways now. It's hard to believe that 2012 is 8 years ago, but he's obviously done great in the NFL. We've gone to a lot of the games. 3 years ago, around this weekend, I went to Minneapolis and saw him play against the Vikings up there. We love the Bucs now. We're all in the fact in this offseason that we got Tom Brady and Gronk and Leonard Fournette, and like, holy smokes! Because I'll tell you what, the last 5 seasons of being a Bucs fan isn't easy, man. They find ways to lose games that are it's pretty amazing. But they're off to a pretty good start. I think it's going to take a little while for this Leftwich offense to start to click. I think, the Bucs like to try to push the ball down the field, but Brady's more of a dink and dunk kind of QB. And unfortunately, so far, I mean, this was a big time where, Gronk had like 2 catches. I think O.J. Howard had a drop. They have Cam Brate, who's another great player. He led the NFL in touchdowns as a tight end a couple of seasons ago. And these guys haven't gotten hardly any looks. It's made even worse by the fact that you guys were talking about it earlier, that how the Raiders kind of dominated the Saints, and the Raiders' number 1 receiver was, guess what, a tight end. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there. I've texted with Allie a little bit over the past couple of weeks, and I think he feels good about what's going on, but I think the defense of the Bucs is going to have to carry them for a little while they get their offense figured out, especially with no preseason.
And speaking of Ali Marpet, how often did you ever get to see him play in person, or do you have any stories surrounding his time here at Hobart and how he became such a standout?
Yeah, I mean, I went to Hobart games in pretty much his sophomore, junior, and senior year. And, he was just clearly heads above everybody else. I mean, there was a pretty funny, doing in the D3FB Huddle show, we get a lot of different tweets and reactions back and forth from D3 football players in the East region as well as nationwide. And there was some pictures and stuff that been sent to us where like Allie's literally like body slamming 200 something pound guys like they were nothing. I saw him play against Dickinson in the first game of his senior year. I mean, that game wasn't even close. Dickinson dropped us from their schedule after that. So, that was the end of that 20-some-odd year rivalry. But, yeah, I mean, he was, especially starting his junior season, he just got so big, so strong, and he's so fast, too. I mean, at the combine, he ran faster than Jameis Winston. So, hey, he's just a really athletic guy. But he's also a really, down-to-earth, really smart. It's kind of, he reads books on philosophy. He's into, modern art stuff. He's a really kind of like an intellectual type of guy too. Even though some people would probably look at him and just think he's just some big, football guy.
You talked a little bit about the Bucs, and I want to just stay on them just for a little bit. Bruce Arians has been really vocal at the beginning of this season, especially the first week, calling out Tom Brady, and then He had a quote, I believe, from this past week at the beginning of the week, talking about Gronk and talking about if Gronk doesn't get catches, he doesn't get catches. What are your thoughts on that? And what are your thoughts on him being vocal? Because I've seen a difference in Brady, at least. Brady seems a lot more social and a lot more out there, especially when he's not under the hoodie from Bill Belichick.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's funny. I think in certain ways there's some similarities between Coach Arians and Hobart's own Coach Craig. I mean, there's really not a lot of BS that goes on. I mean, there's some playfulness and keeping it fast and loose, but there's also a lot of expectation. There's a lot of this is the job you're getting paid to do, so you better do it. And if you don't, Coach Arians is not afraid to constructively criticize his guys, and that's his style. It's the old no risk it, no biscuit. He doesn't censor himself. He just puts it out there, and that's the kind of coach he is. So
lastly, on the Bucs, we'll end it with, there's been talk all the way from they're going to the Super Bowl to wild card. Where are your expectations for where the next 14 weeks are going to go for this Buccaneers team?
Yeah, the thing that having been a season ticket holder and seeing how the Bucs franchise has operated the last 5 years, the key for them to make the playoffs is to actually have a good first half of the season. 1-1 is better than 0-2. But I swear, the last 3 or 4 years, the Bucs were basically either 2-6 or 3-5. Come the halfway point of the season. And so, I mean, they have kind of a favorable matchup with Denver this weekend, but then they have, the Chargers coming to Tampa. They have to play the Bears on a short week. They have to play the Packers at home, and then they go out to Vegas for a Sunday night game, play the Giants, which should be a pretty easy one in Week 8, and then they have the Saints in Week 9. So, I mean, if they can get through that gamut with, especially when you think about how the Raiders just looked, how the Packers are playing. I mean, if they can get through this part of their schedule at 5-3, that would be huge, because the back half is a lot of the divisional games, including that Sunday night one with the Saints. And for now, no fans in the stands at Ray J. Although perhaps by the time the Packers game rolls around, they may allow that. We're still sort of waiting to see. But since Governor DeSantis just basically announced, kind of Florida's quote unquote back to normal, which is interesting. Maybe the Buccaneers will start to loosen up and allow some fans in the stands, like what you saw last night in the Jacksonville-Miami game.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Jacksonville and Miami both have fans at their home stadiums, with Miami last week having fans against the Bills. So it's I thought it was surprising that the Bucs didn't allow fans last week against the Panthers.
Yeah, I was a little surprised too. I mean, we've been told as season ticket holders that basically to wait, and that we would have kind of first dibs on single game tickets once they start being put on sale. But we'll have to wait and see how it goes.
And I'd be remiss while we still have you here. As a co-host of the In the D3 Football Huddle podcast, I know you touched on this a little bit when you first came on earlier.
Yep.
What are you hearing about D3 football? I know there's been rumblings about a spring season. We've seen D1 come back, and what are you hearing about D3? And can we think and maybe have a little hope for some spring football?
Well, I'd like to be sort of glass half full and optimistic. I hope that there is some kind of spring season. And so I give credit to conferences like the ASC, where Mary Hardin Baylor, is a member, and the PAC, which is not too far from upstate New York. Those are schools, like Carnegie Mellon and Grove City, a lot of the Pennsylvania colleges. They have released a spring schedule. If the main hurdle I see to the spring schedules and all of that is whether or not the NCAA and ultimately the college presidents really, keep this requirement of rapid style testing, which is very expensive, and most Division III schools just don't have that in their budget. plus the sort of the NCAA denial of the liability waiver. While certain schools, I mean, a Hobart probably can afford some of the risk that liability waiver situation presents, but other maybe smaller, less wealthy private colleges or state universities might not be willing to put their insurance coverage on a rider that the slight possibility that a student or somebody at a game gets a positive COVID test and it gets passed along to the cost of the COVID test. So just it's an expensive proposition when most Division III athletic departments aren't exactly operating with multi-million-dollar budgets.
Yeah, especially, and it just outlines the differences between a D1 football program and then a D3 football program too, and most D3 sports as well.
The biggest issue I have with the NCAA and how they've handled this whole thing is that they're basically they're only catering to the Power Five and really to a certain extent Power Five from a football perspective. The spring sports situation also creates some potential issues with Title IX and some lawsuits that could come from that if the focus is on just the men's sports versus balancing it out with the with the women's sports too. So there's just a lot that's kind of baked into this that makes it a little bit challenging. But I will say this: plan to manage this. I thought Hobart's HWS's kind of back to sports plan was probably one of the most thorough and thought out ones of all the D3 schools that we cover. And I looked at a bunch of them a few months back, and so I think you guys are in good hands there. It's just going to ultimately come down to certain things that are just out of the statesman inherent control, which is what the NCAA is going to be allowing, and then ultimately what the various conferences and schools will allow. I know that in the fall that the Liberty League was definitely gung-ho on playing. They were kind of caught off guard by the Empire 8's decision to not play. And then they were also kind of caught off guard by RPI and Union sort of bailing early on. And that really, basically kind of killed the season there, especially after Ithaca, one of the very first schools right out of the gate that was basically like, well, we're not coming back until October 5th. And that really kind of started the ball rolling.
Yeah, well, we hope for a sports season too. And I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon because, at being at a small school like Hobart and doing this radio show on a smallish radio station that does get very far, it's a lot. We really appreciate somebody to host a podcast like that reaching out and interacting with us on social media, getting us a little bit more publicity too. So we really appreciate you joining us this afternoon.
Yeah, well, you guys are in a long line of of former statesmen broadcasters. There's Jonas Schwartz, who's on SNY, who covers the Jets. There's Tom Gaz there in the Capital Region, does a sports show, I think, with ESPN, and so there's you certainly have your you got some work cut out for you because you're still you're young and you're getting into the business, but there's been a lot of Hobart guys who've gone off and done this stuff either professionally or kind of weekend warrior hacks like me, and they would be, I'm sure all of them would be more than happy to join you on your show sometime. So just call them up, reach out, and I think you'll be surprised at the responses you get.
Thank you very much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to hear all your stories, and like Chris said, great to talk to another statesman on a Friday afternoon. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Have a great homecoming weekend and a great school year.
Thank you. Talk to you later. And that was James Baker, co-host of In the Division III Football Huddle podcast. 3:45 on a Friday afternoon. We're going to step aside for a couple minutes. When we come back, we're going to dive a little bit more into the NFL picks. Maybe talk a little NBA, honestly. Let's change it up a little bit.
Cue the